Hey everybody, my name is Pastor John Frawley. I'm the senior pastor of Metropolitan Bible Church. This is Caleb Rowland. Yeah, I took that from you, sorry. Caleb is our pastoral resident here at Metropolitan, and we are really excited to start a brand new journey with you. Caleb and I, we teach on Wednesday nights, Bible study for about 25, 30 folks or so called Knowing God. Mm-hmm. And so why is it called Knowing God? This, we're not very original, just truth be told, but why is it called Knowing God?
Because we want to know God. No, it's actually a quote from J.I. Packer from a book that he wrote called Knowing God specifically. And the idea is that you can know God truly even though you can't know him fully. So we'll never fully explore and plumb the depths of who God is, but we can truly know who he is, and we can know more about him and be diligent in our study of learning more about him as well. So,
and if you're going to steal something, you might as well steal it from J.I. Packer.
Steal it from the best. I mean, nobody ever steals from the Dollar Tree. They always steal from, Walmart, something like that. So,
but we're not advocating that. Even though
don't steal. It's bad.
Even though it's like legal now, and you can walk out of Walmarts with all the kind of things that you want now.
It's crazy. I don't know.
All right, let's get back to what we need to talk about. All right, let's start with kind of just a little story here, or just kind of a personal testimony. Let's get really serious.
Yeah.
Did you ever take a math class in school and think, I'll never use this?
Oh, absolutely. Pretty much from the time that I was in the second grade until the time that I graduated high school, I thought, am I really going to use this? Do I need to know addition? I don't know.
I think addition is helpful.
I'm a pastor, so it doesn't really matter to me. I mean, as long as I can count the 66 books, I'm good to go. So,
so what were like some of the things that just like you thought, I'm never going to use this in school?
Yeah, definitely like, Algebra 1, I'm just like, man, I don't know that I'm ever going to need to find x in an equation, x, I don't know that I'm ever going to need this again. So I would say that was definitely one of those things.
I'm watching my kids are starting to learn algebra. Mm-hmm. So I took calculus in high school, AP calculus, and Coach Wallace, if you listen to this, I'm sorry I slept through your entire class. But then I had to take calculus again in college, and linear equations. Mm-hmm. You know the last time I did linear equations?
At the end of your college course. I would just assume. Yeah, okay.
I couldn't tell you what a linear equation is to this day. Mm-hmm. But when we start talking about knowing God, we're really talking about theology. We're talking about what it means to know God and how to articulate those truths in a way that's relevant. So is that relevant? Sometimes we might learn these things in knowing God and say, I don't really understand what the relevance of this is. Feels like just linear equations.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like one of the things that we say around here all the time is that all theology is actually practical theology. And I think an example of that is, one thing that some people would look at as the least practical form of theology would be like eschatology, right? Like, so end times, how is all this going to happen? Like, why do I actually need to know this? Well, just the premise of the end times is that Jesus is coming back, right? And if Jesus is coming back, then that means that we need to live our lives on mission. That means that until the time that he comes, we have things that we need to be doing. Because if we didn't believe that Jesus was coming back, then it's kind of like, well, we've got all the time in the world, right? Just like eventually it doesn't really matter. But the fact that Christ is coming back means that we all need to be living our lives right now as if every day really matters in eternity. And so because of that, theology is practical.
Good illustration of that. So do you remember the game Kerplunk?
I do not.
Okay, so Kerplunk was a game we played as kids, and it had all these like little plasticky straws that kind of interlaced with one another, and you dump a bunch of marbles on top of them.
Okay.
And the game was to go back and forth, and really good if you have like a group of 5 people, and you had to pull out the straws, and the person that pulls out the plastic straw that makes all the marbles dump to the bottom, they lose.
Okay.
And I've always thought that like the doctrine of Jesus returning, of end times eschatology, is a little bit like pulling out on those straws, to where if you take out that doctrine, your entire understanding of what Christianity is all about, of the hope that we have as believers in Jesus Christ, really falls apart.
Absolutely.
And the beautiful thing about theology, as we really dig into this, as we continue to go through all this, and this is a vast field for us to talk about, is it is so practical. And it's all interlaced and kind of working together for a very pleasing whole that really brings us a lot of satisfaction. But it does more than that. So let's kind of just talk a little bit about the word theology for just a second. That word might scare some people. They might think it's too academic. So what does theology mean?
Yeah, so the literal translation would be like God thought, right? Thoughts that we have about God, or you could say God speak. Logos is, the word, the intention, the thought behind things. So whenever we look at that, it's basically our thoughts or talking about God. So.
Okay. So true or false? I'm setting you up.
Okay, here we go.
So,
Yeah.
Everybody does theology.
Absolutely true.
Okay, so I thought theology was only for the academic people that write a bunch of books that try to sell those books to make money, right?
Right. No, absolutely not. I mean, because think about this. If you sneeze and somebody says, God bless you, are they doing theology?
In a way, yeah.
Right. Absolutely.
Maybe it's a superstition.
Right.
So here's a great example I think that we can kind of unpack is you might be listening to this in your car right now, and you may pull up to an intersection, and there may be a guy that's down and out in his luck. He's homeless, and he's holding up a sign, a cardboard sign, a very primitive, basic sign that says, "Hungry, God bless." Mm-hmm. So what are those theological statements that are being stated on that sign?
I mean, one of the things would be saying that if you give to him because he's in need, then God's going to bless you, right? Mm-hmm. So that means that God cares about what we do, about our actions here on this earth, and that's a theological statement, right?
That's a theological statement. Another one that just seems very basic is that God exists.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yep.
He's making a statement that God exists. Another one that I think is pretty interesting is that God wants to bless. Mm-hmm. There's an assumption there that if I do something to help this person, God will then turn around and perhaps bless me in return.
Right, absolutely. And that God is active in the world, right? I mean, because otherwise it would just say God exists. Like that's not a very riveting, compelling sign. But God bless. That says that God is actually active in His creation. So
another thing with the very first word, hungry. Mm-hmm. So to your point, the homeless guy is stating that God is aware of his hunger, mm-hmm. that He actually sees and cares and will do something about that hunger, and maybe He wants to use you in the car to help feed this guy.
Right. Absolutely.
So when you really kind of unpack that, the point I'm making is that everybody does theology.
It's true.
Even the most basic thing that we wouldn't think about, a sneeze. God mm-hmm. bless you, a sign that a homeless guy holds up. An Instagram post with your favorite Bible verse on it, right?
Hashtag blessed, yeah.
Hashtag blessed. All of these things are theological statements that are making some sort of truth claim that's kind of holding it all up and assuming that that's all true. So, there's a lot of things that really, when you kind of get into theology, you have to unpack. And that's why we wanted to do this podcast, because, again, there's a lot of things that we can talk about. But I think the two fundamental questions that we all have to answer in life is, who is God and who am I? Mm. So why do you think those two are so important?
I think because, from the Christian worldview, we can say that who God is then defines who we are, mm-hmm. right? And you will inevitably define one by the other. And so even if somebody says, well, who is God? There is no God. You're going to define yourself mm-hmm. by your belief that there is no God. And so inevitably, we're going to define ourselves by our definition of one of those. So.
Yeah, and if you somehow bypass the first one, mm-hmm. If you say, I don't care about God, or I believe that God doesn't exist, you'll be able to answer that second question, what is a human being, really in any way that you want to. Mm-hmm. And I think you see that in our culture more and more today. You see how people really shape their answers, to at least that second one by perhaps bypassing the first one. But the first one is so essential. Mm-hmm. And if we don't have an understanding of who God is, then we're never really going to understand things like our purpose in life, our destiny, why we are the way we are, our sense of brokenness. What do I do with this shame or guilt that I seem to carry around? So theology helps kind of form all that. So the first point that I'd like to make is that theology shapes our worldview. So when somebody says, Caleb, what in the world is a worldview? Right.
Yeah, so I always think of worldview as a lens. Yeah. Right. It's a lens that we see everything through. And so if you're wearing, the old phrase rose-colored glasses, everything's going to look rosy. Mm-hmm. Whatever you're wearing, you're going to see the world through those lenses. So it's kind of just that meta-narrative, that voice in your head that kind of runs on the kind of back of everything that you do in your life.
Yeah. So do you wear glasses or contacts?
Only whenever I'm on the computer, because otherwise I get a headache. So,
okay. Yeah. So I wear contacts, mm-hmm. and when I wear those dailies, take them out at the end of the night, and my vision keeps getting worse and worse. Mm-hmm. Only in my 40s, but as you get older, things tend to get worse with age. And I can't read the clock, and I have no idea what time it is without my contacts or glasses. And sometimes I look at my wife and I squint, and she's like, "You're not wearing your glasses, right? Or your contacts." And I can't see anything right now. So theology forms that worldview. So a really good example. You like the movie Forrest Gump?
I do.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
We may edit that out.
We probably will. It's fine.
They're shaking their heads over there. So one of my favorite scenes, it's a powerful scene in Forrest Gump, is when they're in the Gulf of Mexico, and Lieutenant Dan and Forrest Gump they're doing their shrimping business. They're running their shrimp boat, and remember the hurricane blows in. And you've got Lieutenant Dan up in the mast, and he doesn't have any legs because of Vietnam. And what is he saying? Do you remember?
I think he's saying, like, is this all you've got, God? Is this storm it? Kind of thing? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, he's like shaking his fist at God, you call this a storm?
Right.
And Forrest Gump, who's just a little bit more kind of, I'd say maybe primitive in his faith or whatever, he's not angry at God. He's scared. He's scared of the storm. And I think, they're in the same situation, they're in the same set of circumstances, but Lieutenant Dan is angry at God and feels like God somehow took his legs from him. And that rage is starting to spill over. And that's a worldview.
Absolutely.
That he feels like he lost his legs because God was angry at him. And how do you reconcile that? So number two, another thing I would say, not only does theology form a worldview, but doctrinal beliefs are essential to knowing God. So, again, that seems somewhat obvious to say, but there are a lot of Christians that would say, I really think that we should just love Jesus. Let's just concentrate on loving Jesus. And what would you say to that?
I would say in general that you have to know somebody to love them, right? I haven't been married for a super long time. I've been married for 5 years, but I have been able to love my wife more the more that I get to know her. Because at first, if I didn't realize that, coming from being a bachelor, I got married when I was 28, so I had been a bachelor for quite a while, and I didn't really care if the dishes in the sink were done. That wasn't really that big of a deal to me. They could go there for days, and they didn't bother me at all. But I realized that loving my wife meant doing the dishes and doing them every night so they didn't sit in the sink overnight because that bothered her. Now, can I say that I love my wife if I don't know her? Well, I could say that, but I'm actually living that out. And so, we can say, like, I just want to love Jesus. I don't want anything to do with doctrine. But ultimately, if we're going to love Jesus well, if we're going to live our lives well, then we have to know him.
Yeah, and even the statement, I just want to love Jesus, is, like we've said, a theological statement on its face. Because it raises the question, well, why is he so special, right? Why should I be, why should I care?
Or even, what is love?
Or what is love?
Baby, don't hurt me. Don't hurt me no more.
So, that's good. So, you have a lot of Christians, I think, that avoid these kinds of conversations about theology because they naturally assume that theology is going to cause division and cause fights in the church. And so, what would you say to that? That, hey, theology is going to divide us as Christians.
So I think that in some ways, theology unites us, but in other ways, theology does divide, and that's okay. The Bible is often pretty implicit about there's a dividing that happens, right? There's sheep divided from the goats. There's, the church divided from the world. There's a lot of these divisions that we see, and not every division is bad. There's a division between male and female, right? We're different in our essence in general, and so whenever we look at those things, we can say, well, theology might divide us, but also theology might unite us in ways that we just don't even realize how sweet it's going to be. So
yeah, and I think a lot of Christians avoid theology conversations like this because they're afraid of being divided. But you're right, it actually brings a uniting aspect in the church. Christians are a lot of different things, but at the very essence of who we are people that are claiming a truth. We are claiming to know the God of the universe, that in itself is a theological statement. And there are a lot of Christian traditions that flush themselves out and kind of see things from maybe different perspectives. And as we continue to go down this journey, we're going to look at maybe some different things that people say and different perspectives. But so much of Christianity is tied together with some of those bare essentials, the deity of Jesus, the Trinity, the authority of the scriptures, right?
Right.
I mean, these are essentials that hold us together. Number three, and we'll kind of continue to go fast here because I think we can wrap up some of these pretty quickly, is that the reason why we're doing this is fundamentally we believe that teaching theology is a way for us to fulfill Jesus' Great Commission in the church. This is super, super important for us to fulfill the Great Commission.
Absolutely.
Number four, as we've already said, biblical truth, theology, it really enriches our lives. Number five, it guards us from the latest fads in our culture. Did you have a WWJD bracelet?
Oh man, I had the bracelet, I had the shirt, the hat, all that good stuff. So.
You went to camp and you got all that swag.
Yeah,
right?
but I was saying the True Love weights rings, all of it, man.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. And so there are a lot of fads that come into the church. And, if you've been a Christian for 5 minutes and you've been in a church for 10 minutes, you're going to find a lot of different things that kind of come in and out. And I think a theological perspective or depth will help you to assess things that really need to last and maybe things that are just going to be like waves on the shore. Come in and take those footprints out of the sand. The last thing, though, and we'll go ahead and close it here, is theology promotes worship. And so when we talk about knowing God, we're not talking about knowing him academically.
Right.
We're talking about knowing him relationally. And we're talking about loving him and who he has revealed himself to be. And so I love Romans 11, 33 to 36. Paul says this, after thinking about doctrine for 11 chapters in this book on the gospel. Oh, the depth of the riches and wisdom and knowledge of God, how unsearchable are his judgments and how inscrutable his ways. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who has been his counselor, or who has given a gift to him that he might be repaid from him, and through him and to him are all things. To him be glory forever. Amen. That's a great place to end. And I think that's a great place to kind of get off and kind of introduce our next subject as we continue down this journey. We're going to be focusing, first of all, on what is the church? And those seem like obvious questions, but they're really, really big. Why does the church matter? What is the church? What makes a church?
Why do we exist as a church?
Why do we exist as a church? But it all is to promote God's glory in our lives. Thank you for joining us. We'd love to tell you more. If you'd like to reach out to us, we'd love to always contact you, encourage you in your walk and faithful witness with Jesus. Thank you.